In this video, I want to review how you can import points into your drawing. I'm going to go through several different aspects of this, including how to import deviation points, such as an as-built on top of a drawing that has design points. So please bear with me as I go through all the different sections of this, and follow along in the chapters and in the description below to navigate to the location that you need. But I'm going to answer many of our importing questions in full in this video. In this example, I have an anchor drawing where somebody would be installing or verifying anchors in the field. If I want to bring in the designed points for this drawing that somebody might have given me, I can go ahead and go to the Import Points button, click on this ellipsis here to find the file that has the CSV that I need. In my case, here are my design points that I'm ready to download and bring into my drawing. Before I open it, let me show you that the two file types that you can import in this case are TXT files or CSV files. These are common point cloud files that are standard for total stations. Before I import these, let me at least show you what a point file will look like in CSV or TXT format. On the right of the screen, I have the CSV file as the points are designed. It looks kind of confusing, but please refer to the video I've linked in the description that talks about CSV files and how to work with them. On the left, I have the same exact file open in Notepad. CSV files have a key attribute, and let me zoom in to help you understand what this attribute is. You'll notice at the top I have my first row here with my point ID, semicolon, northern coordinate, semicolon, eastern, height, semicolon, etc., etc. All the CSV is showing you is the information from the points, the point number with the coordinates and any additional attributes on the right side. This is how this software and total station software in general read CSV files and your point data. With the Hilti field point software specifically, the delimiter or the separating punctuation for all the values needs to be a semicolon, as you see here. It cannot be a comma, a colon, a tab, or anything else. For Hilti field point software, you need to make sure that this is a semicolon for it to recognize it. As you can see here, that is what I saved this as. Now, because I know that there's going to be some questions on how to adjust your delimiter, I might as well answer that question right now. What you'll notice is that when you open up a CSV file in Excel, most of the time, all the data is simply located in one column, all jumbled together. All you need to do to change the semicolon to whatever delimiter you want is press the Control F key for Find and Replace. Click on Replace. You want to indicate you're going to find a comma and replace it with a semicolon. And that will replace all entities. To show you, let me go ahead and do that in reverse, just so you can see the process. I'm going to say find a semicolon and replace with a comma and say replace all. And now you'll notice that I have a comma as my delimiter. But of course, for my data, I want to make sure that that is reversed so that my semicolon remains in place. Hopefully this simple video will get you on the right track as you try to get your CSV data organized. Now that you've seen what a CSV file is in general, which is just your point names and your point coordinates, let's go ahead and bring that information in. I'll go to my ellipsis, find my design file, and say open. The next thing you need to make sure you do is you go to your format and unit settings. This is something you should recognize when you look at the file for the first time. For instance, you can see here at the very top, the first row is actually telling me what my format and my units are. I know that this is an NEH coordinate order, northern eastern height, with units of feet. If, for whatever reason, you're not sure what your coordinates are, just know that if you're in the US and most parts of Canada, NEH is the normal format, and a GC or a surveyor should inform you if it's different. Furthermore, the units are most likely going to be in feet if you're in the United States or parts of Canada, or meters if you're outside of the United States and different parts of Canada. If for whatever reason you're struggling to import these points correctly into the right scale, make sure you reach out to whoever gave you the CSV file. That's information they should certainly know. Since I know that's my information, I'll just simply press OK. What you'll see next is a list of all of the points that the software found in that CSV file. And in my case, these are all the design points that I was given for this anchor point drawing. You'll see that I have the point numbers on the left side with the coordinates and any additional attributes that might have found itself within the point value. Now, before I press continue, I do want to show you this little settings gear. I'm not quite sure what this does. I have always left it checked, and I have not been able to find the difference between leaving this checked or unchecked, but I'm just showing you that I leave it checked when I work with it, if that's any question of yours. Feel free to leave a comment down below if you do find a reason why somebody would leave that checked or unchecked. Now that I've included all my points, I now can press the continue button before I actually import them. When you press continue, you're brought to this screen. Think of this screen as the last stop before you bring the points in. Because notice you have two types of points you can import. You can import new points, or you can import matched points. We'll talk about matched points later in the video. For now, we're definitely bringing in new points because this drawing has no points whatsoever, and so therefore they're going to be considered new points. So now that I've expanded my window to show more information, let me show you another important thing about this. When you bring in points, the software does something interesting that I haven't fully discovered why yet, no matter how many times I try to troubleshoot this. But the layer that the software assumes these points are being brought in on is on layer 0. And for whatever reason, I haven't found a way to adjust that default setting. Now, this doesn't mean you cannot work with layers and change your layers for your points, but bear with me as I show you all of your options. Let's go over here and talk about these two options up here. Number 1, modify new point properties, or number 2, adjust the drawing settings when you bring these points in. Let's start with modify new point properties. I'll go ahead and click on this option. The time that you would want to use modifying new point properties is if there's a few points that you want to quickly change the information for. For instance, if you know that CP1 should be a different name, such as WP20, you can easily change that information. In this window, you can change everything except for coordinates and staked information. Everything else can be changed. What you might find a little bit frustrating about this window is that you cannot select and shift many points at once. You can only go one by one by one by one. So for instance, if I want all of these CP points to be on the control layer, I have to tap on that one by one by one to indicate that I want these on my control layer. Now, because I've placed that on my control layer, let me also make sure that over here under control status, I set that to yes. Now the reason I did this is because you're going to notice you can specify the way that control points look versus the way that your layout points look. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and keep this as is, and I'll press OK. Now to keep this simple, I'm only going to import these 5 points. Now before I import them, let's go ahead and click on Import Field Points to Drawing Settings. Notice I have 4 tabs up here. I have New Points, Control Points, Matched Points, and Display Format. We'll talk about display format and match points later in the video, but for now, let's just talk about new points and control points. Obviously, I'm importing control points because I'm taking these to my control layer, and as you can see, I have them indicated as being control. Because of that, anything that has a yes in this control column is going to have the control point setting applied to them. So let's see, how do I want my control points to look? How about I go ahead and make it a square plus? That's just a nice icon that I can differentiate from other points. I'll make sure that we have an automatic annotation. And as far as layer options, I have 3 different options. I can have the tool create a layer if the layer that I have selected over here does not exist. I can have it apply a layer of my choosing if this layer doesn't exist. Or I can simply have it apply a layer of my choosing to all the points regardless of what exists over here. So most of the time when this case comes up, I usually choose the one that's most applicable to my situation. Right now, if I choose either this top one or this middle one option, all of these points are going to be going on the control layer because I know the control layer does indeed exist in my drawing. So because I'm happy with that, I'll go ahead and press OK. Now, because I have the 5 points I want to bring in, they're all good to go, I'll simply say import. Now, in my Layer Properties Manager, you'll notice that my control layer that I put these on is this blue layer. Let's zoom in and see if the point entity is correct. I'll highlight over it, and you can see that yes, it is a square with a cross, and at the very bottom of that tooltip, you'll notice it says control. The points are brought in the right spot. Now the annotations are a different color because in my settings, my annotation is set to be on the designed points layer, which is this magenta layer. And if I need to change that, I can go ahead and do that by changing the layer to what I want, and then going to annotations and apply those point annotations. Again, that's in a different video if you need more information on that. But I'm happy with these control points. They look the way I want them to look, and I'm happy with the layer that they're on. Let's now go ahead and bring in another set of points. I'll go to Import Points. Let's find that same file. And this time, when I'm putting these points in, I know that these first 5 control points I no longer need to include. I've already imported them. So I'll completely disregard those and simply work with everything else. Let me say continue. Now I'm brought to this screen again. How do I want to import these points? In my case, I don't really need to change any properties of these points. I'm happy with their point name and number and the attributes. Let me go ahead and change the settings though, so that I can specify how I want these new points to appear. My favorite entity is this circle with an X for all my layout points. I like to have automatic annotations, and for my case, because layer 0 again was default, I'll just simply tell the tool that I want all of these points, apply this layer to all the points to be on the design points layer. That's where I want these points to be placed. Unfortunately, for this situation, these two options would put these on layer 0, which is not where I want these points. Layer 0 does exist, so even choosing one of these two options would still put it on layer 0. In this case, I'm going to simply apply all of these points to the design points layer. Now that I have that accurate, let me say OK. I'll go ahead and right click here, say include all, and now I'll say import. I'll zoom into these here, and you can see that yes, these points are now placed on the pink design points layer, and you can see that in the tooltip at the bottom it says layer on design points, and my annotations are still placed on my design points layer as I have it set up in settings. So it seems like everything's importing correctly, just the way I like it and how I like to visualize it. Now, if I can make one final note about what to do about the fact that the software defaults all of your points you're importing to layer 0. I know we talked about how you can edit the layers over here in the settings, but what's another thing that you can do, or a best practice that I found that might help you? If layers are important to you, what you can do is simply make several different CSV files of your points. Make one CSV file for one layer, then another, then another, and then another. Maybe you have 4 or 5 different CSV files that represent your points. All you need to do in that case is import them one by one by one into the software and simply indicate in your point settings that you want to apply a layer to all the points you're bringing in so that it overwrites the 0 layer that it's going to apply it to. That might be a nice workaround for you. In any case, please leave in the comments your experience with this to hopefully contribute best practices to everybody that's interested. I would really like to hear from you if you find a way to make the software not default this to layer 0. That would be extremely helpful. Now, let's talk about how you can work with deviations. We're getting a little bit advanced, but if this applies to you, I hope this next part of the video really helps. I'm going to import a file now that happens to be a CSV of staked as-built points from these anchor bolts in this drawing. I'm going to show you 2 approaches, both equally advanced and equally basic, that you might want to take in how you import as-built or deviation points. So here's my staked points CSV. Let's open this and import it. You'll notice that when I was using a Hilti total station and I staked these points on the tablet, the software automatically called these points LP1_STK. These are all the staked points that I made, and of course these LP numbers apply and are related to the layout points that are also in the design file that I just imported. So you might label your staked points a little bit differently, but the way that my tablet labeled it was with this STK. However you label your points, just make sure you know how they're labeled so that you know what you're bringing in and importing. So let me go ahead and continue, and let's import these points. Let me show you the basic way that I might import these points to find my deviations. First, I'll go ahead and make sure I include all of these STK points. I do want to use all of them. Now for my point entity, I'll go ahead and use a square plus circle just to kind of differentiate it from the magenta layout point. I'll make my annotation points automatic, and let's go ahead and apply this to the staked points layer, which is a dark red layer. Now I'll go ahead and press OK. Now what you didn't see in the background is that I, in my annotation settings, made sure that the annotation for these points is also on the staked layer, so hopefully I can differentiate not only the points, but also the annotation. Now I'll go ahead and say import. Let me zoom in and find a deviation that seems fairly large. Here we go. Here's an anchor bolt embed that seems to be off-placed. Here's where they were designed to be on the pink, and the red represents the staked points. Let's go ahead and do a distance check to see the difference between this point and this point. If you look down here, you'll see that the distance is showing up as 11 inches. Keep in mind that's keeping height into account. For now, I'm going to disregard the height value, and I'm only going to look at the delta x and delta y values to know how I need to move this point horizontally to get to where I know it belongs in the design. This point on the x-axis is 3/16 off, while on the y-axis it's about 3 5/16 off. So this point needs to be moved over and up, obviously. That's a really interesting deviation to observe. Let's find one that's a little bit closer. Let's just go over to this embed. Let's do a distance check on these points. Let's go from the center of the red to the center of the pink. Now we're getting much tighter deviations. These points are off by about 1/4 of an inch on the x and the y axis. So if I'm going through this and I want to do a quick check of these points, I'll go ahead and look through, and maybe I'll check the ones that I'm concerned with, not concerned with, etc., and I'll do these quick visual checks. Importing your as-built points in this manner is one way you can visually see what's going on between the two different sets of points. But what if you wanted the software to give you more information? Hilti Field Points is designed to be able to import deviation data and automatically calculate this deviation data for you. Let's show you what that would look like. Now before I begin, I want to show you how you might need to edit your file before you go forward with this. As you can tell, these points, the design points, have specific names: LP89, LP91, etc. If I want to match my staked points to these layout points, one of the easiest ways to do this is simply to make sure that your staked points are named the same as your layout points without that extra suffix or anything you have on them. So all I'm going to do is in the CSV file, I'm simply going to find this STK suffix. So I'm going to find STK, and I'm going to simply replace it with blank. So I'm going to replace all. So now what you see is I have all of these points. These are my staked points renamed with the exact same names as the ones in the design. Let me show you why I did that. I'll go ahead and save this now. I'm going to now import those points. Here's my new staked points. And as you can see, they're now labeled as the design points are labeled in the field. I'll say continue. This is where we need to introduce all of your matched point options. We're not importing new points anymore. We're importing matched points. And as you see, right now we have no matched points. We need to make matched points. So what do you do? How do you go from here? Well, let's start with the settings. Let's edit the settings for our matched points before we go in and make those matched points. First, you'll notice that we have this display format over here where it's going to ask us simply, when we're looking at our matched points compared to the points that are already in our design, do we want to see them with decimals only, or are we okay to use the fractional inches that we have? If you prefer decimals, simply press check. That's completely up to you, and you'll see in a moment what that looks like. Down here, it's asking you for your description format. When you're making your matches, how much information regarding the points that you're importing and the points that are existing do you need to see in order to make your matches? For me, I only need the point number and the coordinates. That's sufficient for me to make the matched points that I need, and I'll show you in a moment what that looks like. However, if you need more information to make your matched points, you can add information as needed, but I really don't think you'll need to. I think that the point number is all you need as well. Now, secondly, before we make our matched points, let's go over here and edit what it's going to look like when those matched points are imported. The first thing to show you is this entity name. When we bring in the points, any point that's been matched that has any sort of deviation whatsoever is going to have a revision cloud placed around it, if we so choose. And you can see that I have it checked. Simply go through here and choose the revision cloud of your choice so that it can highlight that for you and be bright and clear so you can see it. If you want to change the revision cloud, press that settings gear and simply choose the one of your choice or upload your own cloud that you've made yourself. Now, once you've selected your cloud, you'll notice that there's a layer option down here to place that cloud on whatever layer you choose. Right now I have staked points selected, but I'm going to change that later down the road to the deviations layer after I make it a bright green layer for easy visualization. And the offset options down here simply ask you how you want that cloud to be offset from the actual point itself. You'll see in a moment what that looks like. Now, in addition to all of these, you'll see that I have the Ignore Z selected. The reason I have Ignore Z selected is because I know that the deviation of my staked points on the Z-axis doesn't matter to me. I simply want to see how I need to move my points on the X and Y axis, so if there is, for whatever reason, a deviation on the Z value, it's not important to me. If it's important to you, though, make sure you don't have Ignore Z checked. Uncheck that so you can see the Z value deviations as well. Now let me talk about tolerance. First, I'll start with this match tolerance up here at the top. This match tolerance, I believe, only matters if you're matching your points based off their coordinate values. If you're matching them based off the coordinate values, you can adjust your tolerance on your coordinate values so that you can indicate to your matching system just how tightly close the points you're bringing in need to be to the design points in order for them to make a match based off their coordinates. I very rarely use this, and I have not really tested this so much, so feel free to use this if you're matching based off coordinates. And if anybody does use this and recognizes that I'm wrong, please leave that in the comments. However, the most important part about this for you, especially if you're doing deviation reporting, is the deviation tolerance. Before I talk about this, please know that regardless of what the tolerance is here, all of the points that have any deviation whatsoever is going to appear with a cloud around it. However, if you want to see those points in some sort of deviation report, where you're observing all those values and all those deviations in a PDF report, you need to indicate the points that you want to appear on that report. Let me go ahead and type 0.25 in here. So any point that is a quarter of an inch outside of where it's designed to be will pop up in my report. That's what this tolerance means. This also means that any point that is within a quarter of an inch of tolerance will not appear in my deviation report when I actually make the report. And I'll show you what that looks like in a moment. But the reason I bring it up here is because once you set that for the points you're bringing in, there is no location that I have found to reset that, which means that you'd have to delete all of your points and bring them all in again to run the match if you need to set this tolerance again. So what I usually do when it comes to tolerance is I simply set this very low. I just put 0.001 inches in there. That's less than a 64th of an inch, so I know that any point that's in any way outside of the deviation of another point, I'll see it on my deviation report. And then I'll look at my deviation report and determine what to do with any of the points afterwards. Feel free to comment down below about how you go about setting your tolerance for your deviation reports if this is something you use. But the most important thing to see here is that I've set myself up the way I want to see my points on the drawing and how I want to see my points on my deviation report. So now I'm going to go ahead and press OK, and I'm going to go ahead and make my matches based off the information I set here in my display format. Right now, I still have no matched points. All my points right now are being considered as new points. Therefore, what I need to do to get matched points is I need to go to this new tab where I create additional matches. This is where you can now understand why I renamed all of my points to match the names of the points that are already in the drawing. You'll see that I have basic match rules set up. What this does is it brings up all these different categories, inviting you to set different scenarios of how you want your points to match with each other. Most of the time, I match my points based off of the point number. As long as the point number from the design matches the point number from the ones I'm bringing in, it's going to make a match. And you can see that it automatically made a match for me. LP1, which is the one I'm bringing in, is connecting to the LP1 in the current drawing. LP1's location is different than the design point's location. That's expected, but you can see they're making a match. So I know that LP1 from the import and LP1 from the design are going to match up, and I'm going to be able to see their deviation once I import these. Let me show you the alternative if you weren't able to make matches. Let me go ahead and remove this option, and you'll notice that right now none of these points have a match. If I wanted to match any of these points Manually, I could do so by simply clicking the dropdown and finding the point in the design that it matches to. This is overly cumbersome, which is why it's important to find a way to automatically have your points match like I've done. And that's why my best practice has always been to simply make sure that the points I'm bringing in match the exact same name for the points I'm intending to match them to. So I'll go ahead and say matches for point number, and you can see it automatically matches for me. Now I'm not going to go into this video because I don't think you're ever going to use it, but just in case, there is a way to set up your own custom matches. If you choose custom, you can come over here to this ellipsis and manage your custom match rules to your own preference. I've attempted this, I've tried to do this on my own, not to much success at all, at least in not a successful way to where I think I'd use it on a consistent basis. However, if this is something you think you might benefit from, I recommend you to simply press the question mark up here and follow the rules as it guides you on how to make new rules. In fact, if you want deeper help on this, simply go to the help icon at the top, press this help icon, it'll open up the entire manual, and now under this folder, where it's bringing up imports, create additional matches, you can go through all of these options to help you understand how you can make your own custom match rules. This is what I followed when I tried it myself. I hope that at least helps you, and please, if this is something you do, I would love to hear what you do in the comments with your own custom rules, because it will also help me. Now, before I create these matches, hopefully now you can understand why under the display options in settings that I only chose to see my point name and my coordinates. That's all I needed to make these matches work. I didn't need to see attributes, layers, etc. I just needed to see these two variables, and it cleaned up this data for me. But now that I know that they're working, I'll say create matches. I'll close out of this window, and now I no longer have any new points, but all my points have been moved to the match points column. Let me verify one more time that these are going to be moving to the deviations layer, which is a bright green layer. So all of these revision clouds are now going to be on the deviations layer, really bright so I can see it. And if you remember, that layer, I had accidentally, in the previous windows, left it as staked points. So I'm just fixing that right now. Now, if you haven't noticed, another blunder that I forgot was this ignore Z box I actually left unchecked. This is not a big deal, but all this means is that the Z value is going to be considered as part of the deviation data. So I will see the deviation data between the height values of the designed and staked points. So at least you'll be able to see that information. Now I'll say include all and import. Now you can see my revision clouds are placed on my deviations layer. Let me zoom in over here so you can see clearly what happened. When you bring in points in this manner, you'll notice that the pink original design point moves from its original location to the location of the point that I matched it to. It does that all the while this revision cloud goes around that point. So the design point moves away and gets a revision cloud around it. So be aware of that. If you need the design points to remain in their original location, perhaps you might want to be careful of when and how you do this method of matching. Now, however, notice I get another benefit. If I highlight my cursor over this point, in the tooltip menu, especially towards the bottom, you'll notice that I now have a deviation value. You'll see exactly how that point needs to move to get back to its original location. And in this case, it needs to move to the left 5/64 of an inch and to the north 3 3/8 of an inch. And because you can see the green revision cloud around these points, you can easily spot the ones that are now needing to be looked at. This point here, if I highlight over it, seems to be only a ½ inch off or so on the left and right, and just about 1/8 or so on the north and south. Now, because we imported our points this way and made a match, let me discuss what report you can get from doing this. And this is where I think this might really benefit you, especially if you're doing something like anchor bolt verification. After I make a match, I can go to my reports, and this is where the tolerance came into play, as well as deciding whether or not you wanted the Z value included as part of the deviations of your points. Let's open up our reports, and let's go to deviation point data. We'll select the entire drawing so we can find all of the points within the drawing that have a deviation. If you only needed a few of them, you could have used this option, but we're going to select the entire drawing, and notice it found 362 entities. Let's press OK. What it does is it brings up a report of all of the points that we matched, as well as the deviation. And you can see here it is. Here's our deviation tolerance, 0.0010 inches. Any point that's off is going to pop up here. And now you can go point by point and identify the points and their deviations at the top. So I know that LP140 was designed to be at this location, but the current coordinate is at this location. And one thing I'm already noticing is that I forgot to uncheck Z elevation. I thought I checked it, but I guess I didn't. But it is also showing me my Z elevation as well. But this is the information that I find so valuable from matching your points. Design coordinate, current coordinate, and then up here written very clearly the deviation. This one's only 1/8 of an inch off and only a 32nd of an inch off on the X and Y axis. You can go through here and highlight in the PDF viewer or some sort of PDF editor the points you find most critical. So all in all, I hope this video has helped you. I know it was long, but as I mentioned throughout the entire video, please leave questions that you have in the comments. Also, please share your experiences in the comments of how you use these features. I'd be really interested to hear from you. And one last note, I'll link in the description of this video a good method that you can use to do further deviation reporting by simply using CSV files in Excel.